Now we're going to talk about bringing to life our texture atlases into low polygon foliage. Now these are three examples of variations that I've taken from one atlas texture. You can see here I've got my alpha texture as a background image that I was using as a reference to build out these components. So each of these pieces of this foliage are built from different pieces cut out of that texture. Now ideally each piece of foliage, even though it can have lots of different leaves and stems and trunks or whatever is making up your object, it can be made out of lots of different things, but they're all being pulled from the same textures, and that's pretty key. We want to keep the hit on performance low, so we're going to be pulling from one image or one image set rather along a variation of one species. You will have potentially different species in a scene, but they'll have their own image texture set. So in this piece of foliage, there are 180 faces, 260 vertices. That's pretty low resolution, and it might not look like much now, but when we bring it into Unreal in our final compilation, we will see, when there's lots of variations in scale and rotation and adding some vertex animation such as wind, these could really start to look like, they're part of a ecosystem and not like they're pulled from a texture of some rusty cans and bones. So we're going to continue using this Quixel Megascans texture that I've been pulling from as a demo, but you too can use your own scans from your flatbed scan projects or even photographs. But again, we're pulling from arrays of objects grouped into a square. So we're going to work on this project from a template file that I will provide. And what that template is simply some things that are pre-set up for you. The first element of this template is going to be up in here in our collections panel, this background reference object. Now all it is a picture, and I've made it so you can't select it here for sake of just editing around the viewport. You don't want to be clicking on this and it getting in the way. But all it is a picture. You see if I turn this opacity down, we're probably going to want to play with that. But if we actually click on the object in the collections panel, that's going to let us make these changes. So from here, you're going to want to select your own alpha for your texture. So I'm going to click this X and click open where it says image. And if you don't see this, I'm down here at the object data properties. Click open image and search for, in our textures, our alpha. So here's our first step done. Here I've got another object. This is going to be our reference to scale that Unreal Engine will be using. So we want to build our objects around or in reference to this scale. So if you're building grass, you can use this as a reference to scale that as you might intend. If you're building a tree, you can use this to scale that as you might intend. But this is the reference to a body. This is pulled from Unreal Engine 4. And since we are using Unreal Engine, I figured we might as well include some elements of that. So this is just nested in here in its own UE4 mannequin scale. I've also made it unselectable so it won't get in the way, but you can simply turn it off with this checkbox here. And then I've got a folder for components, and my intention is that as we're building our different objects here, I'm just pretending that these are our different foliage objects. I want to put these in the components folder as they're the different things that might make up our species. So just as a way to stay organized so we don't end up overwriting our kind of source materials as we're building up our foliage objects from this. So when you start to actually build something, what I recommend doing is duplicating these things and bringing them into one of your variation of your species folders. Then we can hide the components and then start to arrange these. So if these are our stems, you know, we can start imagining once we've drawn out everything, using the gizmo here. So super just rough playing around here trying to demonstrate how we might use this template file. But let's say that's our variation 1 species. So what we want to do when we're done is we're going to take everything in that variation 1 and we're going to hold down Control and hit J on the keyboard. So again, we're going to select an object inside of this variation 1 folder, and with nothing else visible in the workspace, in the viewport, I'm going to hit A on the keyboard and then Control J. Otherwise, you can click on an object inside of your variation that you want to join, use the marquee, and then Control J. Here you want to position this to the origin and reset its object origin. Okay, so there's, say, our first variation, and you'll populate in the same way, pulling from your components, your kind of raw components that you're building around your atlas. You're going to take those components, start to build your variations, join those variations into one body in object mode, and have ultimately populated 3 to 5 variations. The last part I want to mention in terms of visualization is I've got on here something in the background that is pre-built lighting for you. So if we go up to scene settings, you can see in here I've got a background setup. It's an HDRI, which is this kind of 360 degree image that's basically casting light and shadows on your object. And that's just to help with a little bit more realistic lighting as you're doing modeling. I'm in the rendering mode here, the viewport shading set to rendered. We want to make sure you're on Eevee. That's going to be the easiest hit on your computer's resources. If you really want to play with things in cycles, that's fine, but Eevee is going to give us enough of a preview just to kind of see what your roughness and normals are doing. I've got no textures on here, so it's kind of a moot point, but just be aware that there is this HDRI built in, packed together into this Blender template file. So that's the template. I'm hoping it will be a helpful tool as you're building up your foliage objects from your atlases, and you won't have to worry so much about how to come up with a structure. I think this one should be helpful. If you find another way to do it, that's fine too. You could just use this as a jumping off point.